Lessons from the ninth game of the FIDE World Chess Championship between Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia and Ding Liren from China. In this game, Jan is white, and Jan at this stage is leading in the World Championship with a margin of 1 point. It is a best of 14 match. The winner becomes the World Chess Champion. Jan started by e4 and black replied e5. After which knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez opening. At this stage, Ding played knight f6 instead of the more common move a6, which he has played twice in this match previously. Well, black played knight f6. This is called the Berlin defense. It had a reputation of being slightly inferior to the move a6, but in the past 20 years, this has become one of the most popular alternatives to the move a6. Well, the idea behind knight f6 is, after castles, black will actually capture the e4 pawn, and when white recaptures the e5 pawn with his d pawn, usually white will play d4. Well, he has many alternatives. He can play rook e1, and he can play many other ways of uh, uh, recapturing the e5 pawn. But this is the most critical move. Black will make use of the fact the bishop is still on b5 and not on a4. So how does he exploit the fact? He will move his knight to d6, which is slightly unusual move given the fact that the bishop is shut on c8. But the knight on d6 actually attacks the bishop on b5. And this is why black had refrained from playing a6 in the first place. Along with the attack on bishop, he has the second idea of protecting the e-pawn by advancing it. So this is the main idea behind the Berlin, where white usually exchanges the bishop. And now the c8 bishop is suddenly quite happy. It is on a good diagonal. White recaptures the pawn, and usually he plays queen d8, heading for an endgame. So this is the most critical position of the whole Berlin defense. Previously, it was thought white has the advantage because he has an extra pawn on the king side. But later, Grandmaster practice has shown that black can generate a lot of counterplay thanks to his light square bishop, which white does not have. And the presence of pawn on e5 instead of e4 makes all the difference. Had the pawn been on e4, it would have restricted the c8 bishop. But with the pawn on e5, the bishop and black's pieces has access to all light squares in the center. So the good players with black have demonstrated that black can equalize from this position after accurate defense. That is why many top players after knight f6 by black are opting to play d3, preserving tension instead of going into the endgame. So this is what Jan played, and now both sides continued the development. White plays c3. This is another trademark move of the Ruy Lopez. Instead of knight c3, white plays c3 to restrict the knight and have an option of d4 in future. Black castled, white castled, and now black lashed out with d5 instead of the more traditional move, which is d6. The move d5 takes the center, the idea being that if white ever captures on d5, black will recapture with his queen. Since the move knight c3 is no more possible, and black will have a very healthy piece position after bishop g4, both the rooks on d8 and e8, black will have the advantage. White played knight d2, and later, at the opportune moment, he can take d5, applying pressure on e5. So black decided to stabilize the center first, and then play a move which is fashionable for black in similar positions. He played a5. Well, previously such moves were frowned upon because the b5 square is left permanently for white's pieces. Once black plays a5, he can no longer play a6 in future. But the move a5 has its advantage too. White cannot take space on the queen side by playing b4, chasing the bishop, and putting the bishop on a bad square. White played a4, and now black continued with his development by protecting the e5 pawn. Well, by the way, here it is slightly risky for white to actually exchange the bishop because although black has a weak pawn structure, his bishop may become a monster piece on a great diagonal. Since white does not have light square bishop, these squares will be very weak and white has to handle those. So here white played a4, black played queen e7, white played queen c2. All these moves are very natural moves. The reason is white wants to move his knight. He protects the e4 pawn. And this is a very important moment of the game. Black played an unnatural move, that is, he retreated his developed knight and undeveloped it by playing knight b8. It's a very strange move, but why did black play this move? If you look at this position, the knight is on a good square, but it doesn't have any future because it's restricted by white's pawn. Compared to that, the counterpart of black's knight, the white knight on d2, has a great future on g3 or e3, threatening to jump on important squares. Of course, white will calmly, very slowly play knight f1, knight g3, and only after that knight f5. But compared to that, the black knight is not active. So he plays knight b8. He is regrouping his knight by playing knight d7 or knight a6 in future. And more importantly, he rules out the possibility in future of white damaging black's pawn structure. And also he will chase away the black bishop by playing c6. Sorry, the white bishop by playing c6. White played rook e1, making way for the knight. Black played rook d8. White played h3, preventing black from putting his piece on g4, probably the knight on g4. Black played h6, white played knight f1, and black played c6, bishop c4. Here the knight developed from a6. Black chose an alternative route for the knight. It can regroup via c7 and come to an important square e6 in future. Or sometimes it can move to c5 and then drop to e6. Sorry. In this position, white played knight g3, black played queen c7. This is a very, very good move. The reason behind playing queen c7 is it makes the way for the bishop to go back to f8. Yeah, here the bishop would go back to f8. Therefore, the queen makes way for the bishop to drop here. And the presence of bishop on f8 is very important because it will defend on the king side once white's pieces will accumulate on the king side. Black will have to defend very cautiously. So this plan is very important. And we also notice that how white very slowly and steadily shifts his pieces to the king side to attack on the weak squares. Now here white played bishop a2. Probably he wants to preserve his bishop and move it away from black's future b5 counterplay. Black played b5 immediately. White played queen e2, shifting his pieces. The queen eyes on b5 as well as on the king side. This is how white gradually brings all his pieces to the king side. After rook b8, well, here most of the commentators who were commenting on this game, they said the move bishop f8 directly was desirable, and indeed it was a good move. Black could have stuck to his plan because at this point the b pawn can be captured by white, but black has a very nice move, knight c5. So this is a very useful pawn sacrifice which black could have done with the threat of trapping white's queen on b5. Here white's only resource would have been b4, and this is what Ding had calculated while opting for the move rook b8. b4 looks dangerous because this makes way for the queen on a5. If now black plays bishop a6, the queen can escape by capturing another pawn. And also black cannot capture AB because we have a very nice discovered attack. Now since the A line is opened, the bishop moves away with a check, and the next move white captures the rook with a winning position. So b4 is a move which probably looked scary, and that is why black played rook b8. But even after b4, black can actually continue with knight d3, attacking the rook. When the rook goes to d1, black can play bishop a6, attacking the queen. The queen captures the second pawn, but black will capture on c3, attacking the rook. Well, here, and also attacking the pawn, especially the pawn, because the rook is at present immune, since white does have a discovered check on f7 and take back with the queen. But basically, black attacks the b4 pawn. White will play bishop to d2, queen c2, and black's active pieces compensates for the material deficit. Here black is threatening a discovered attack with his bishop. By moving his bishop, he will attack the queen with his rook. And one probable variation how white can immediately finish the game with a draw is he can sacrifice his exchange. When black captures c1, white would take back the knight, attacking the queen. The queen will move to b2, and then white can play rook b1, and we have a repetition. So this could have been played. Black could have played bishop f8 immediately, sticking to his original plan, but instead he played rook b8, which is also a playable move, but then he had to survive some scary moments, as we shall see. White continued knight h4. He now wants to attack on the king side. The black bishop went to f8. White played queen f3. Now the queen joins the attack. The knight on g3, h4, queen on f3. This bishop has a very nice attacking diagonal, and this bishop also has an attacking diagonal. So it seems white has lots of pieces to attack on the king side, and black has to be very careful to defend. He played ba4. This is a very important decision because, as we shall see, black goes for counterattack. White takes bishop takes h6, based on the fact that if black takes pawn takes h6, white will recapture the knight, and since the black king is weakened without the g pawn, the white's knights will invade from f5 or h5 squares. And this indeed looks scary. Even queen g6 check is on the agenda, since the bishop on a2 pins the f7 pawn. So it's a very scary moment for black, but it's commendable the way Ding Liren playing black defended from this position. He played knight to c5. It's a very calm move. He brings more pieces towards the king side, but more importantly, the knight can jump to b3 at a favorable moment and basically block one of white's attacking bishops. White played knight g6. He could have played bishop g5 with the idea of damaging the pawn structure further, but then since the knight cannot move, it's pinned. But then white could have played black could have played rook d3 before moving the knight, and black would have a defendable position. Well, in this position, white went knight g6, trying to remove the f8 bishop, which is a defender. Black took rook b2, so he goes for counterattack. He knows just in case white has too strong attack, he takes some pawns so that he can give back some material and remove white's attacking pieces. So he goes for rook b2, counterattack. White continues with his plan of removing black's defenders. Now here, this is an important moment. Black opted for a very safe move, that is, he took back the knight with his rook. Some of the commentators pointed, since the knight cannot escape anywhere, black could have played knight b3 at once, shutting this bishop and taking this knight later. But it seems that after moves like, say, bishop b3, a b3, now black has two pawns, dangerous pawns on the queen side, passed pawns. Thankfully, the a pawn cannot move at this point because of this rook. So white is a piece up temporarily. He can keep on probing black by playing bishop g5. And there is an important resource. After, say, black takes back the knight, black is one pawn up, but white can play a move like, say, c4 with the threat of moving the queen to c3, attacking this rook and attacking this pawn. Well, that would have given white some advantage because the b pawn is vulnerable now since it cannot be supported by his partner on a file. So this was a possible variation which was good for white. So black opted for a safe choice, that is rook to f8. Here white has an option. He has to move his bishop to a more useful diagonal to continue the attack successfully. So here, typically, like some of the old games of Mikhail Tal, Jan opts to change the diagonal of the bishop. So he sees this diagonal very, very vulnerable in the absence of black's dark squared bishop. So he preferred this idea of playing bishop c1 and bishop a3, suddenly changing the diagonal and track of attack. But before playing bishop c1, he has an option of playing one intermediate move, moving the black knight to h7, and then playing bishop c1. Now the question is, which is a better move? Playing bishop c1 directly or playing bishop g5 and then playing bishop c1 in the next move? Jan opted for bishop g5, knight h7, and bishop c1. But there was a point behind playing bishop c1 directly. That is, when the rook goes to c2, if black rook goes to c2, white will continue with his plan of bishop to a3. And when black plays knight b3, sacrificing his exchange, of course, white will have to capture this first and then black would take back with the king. Black has connected passed pawns for an exchange, but white could play something like queen e3 with the idea of queen c5 check capturing the a pawn. So that would give white slight chances of advantage. But if white plays bishop g5 first, forcing the knight back, in this situation black would capture the f8 with his knight. Knight on h7 is actually an advantage for black, since he, instead of capturing with the queen, king he can capture with the knight. And now white doesn't have the option of checking the queen from c5. So this is one reason why playing bishop c1 directly would have been better against rook c2. Okay, of course, black has an option of playing rook b5 also. But in the game, white played bishop g5, knight h7, bishop c1. And now black could have played rook c2, since he can take back the rook with his knight. But he opted for rook b5 instead. White played bishop a3. Black went rook e8. And white played bishop c4. Now white is on the verge of winning an exchange. He's attacking the rook. The rook cannot move because the c5 bishop, the knight is undefended. Black had to play something like rook bishop e6, sacrificing an exchange with the hope that in this position black's pawn clusters on the queen side and the grip on light squares would compensate for his material deficit. He has a knight and a pawn for a rook, which is slightly bad materially, but since his pieces are well placed, he is hoping to get compensation. So this is the reason why black played bishop e6. And now white decided, instead of taking the rook, to opt for a safe move, bishop e6. Well, bishop b5 would have been a critical move, and it would be nice to check how much compensation black has uh, instead of the exchange. But white went for a safer move. He took back the bishop, took the bishop. Black took back with the knight, and now white played knight f5 with the idea of knight d6. Black played c5, preventing white's idea. White played queen e2 with the idea of taking back the queenside pawns. At this moment, black is a pawn up, but these are not useful pawns anyway. And white wants to capture this loose pawns. Black played rook b3, white went queen c4. Black played queen to c6, defending the a4 pawn. White attacked a4. Black went knight f6. White took queen a4. After queen a4, rook a4, we have almost an equal position. Both the sides have equal pawns. White has an extra pawn on the king side. Black has an extra pawn on the queen side. So black went rook c3 to simplify the position. White played bishop b2 and captured the e pawn. So he is creating some kind of imbalance. 4-2 on the king side, 2-0 on the queen side. Black played rook b4, rook a5, rook e4. And here, after the exchange of the rooks, we have an almost equal and drawn position with both sides having 3 pawns each. But even in this so-called dead positions, where the chances of win is very slim, white found a very important resource. He played rook to a4, attacking the knight. If the knight goes here, white can play something like rook g4 and continue attack against black's e7 pawn. If the knight goes to d2, well, white has once again the move rook g4. And this time, this looks very scary indeed, because if black advances the pawn, white can actually weave a mating net by something like bishop f6 and rook on h4 and rook on h8. So it looks like as if white has found a resource even in a drawn position. But surprisingly, black can, even in this position, black can find a very nice way of drawing by playing knight to f4. This is a brilliant move. Black sacrifices the knight with the aim that he is counter-attacking on e5. And if white captures the knight with his bishop, black can actually go rook e1 check, forcing the king to come up, and then playing knight f1 check. The king cannot escape from g3, so it has to come back, and then black can happily repeat this position. If white plays rook g7 instead, black will calmly go to h8, not fearing a discovered attack because the bishop itself is attacked. And now once again, if white takes on f4, black will go for the perpetual check. So it would have been a very interesting draw. Instead of knight d2, black played the most sensible move by humans. That is, he played knight d4, sacrificing his pawn to reach a theoretical drawn position. This is a type of position where white has an extra pawn, but since all the pawns are on king side and black has to defend only a very narrow area, he can successfully defend with his rook and knight. And finally, if white has an extra pawn, if he is able to create an extra pawn, a passed pawn, then the knight can sacrifice for the pawn when white has the last pawn, leaving white with an extra knight against a lone king, which is a draw. So this is a theoretical draw, but even here, black has to take some care. And the game lasted for more than 40 moves from this point. So I'll not go through all the moves because it will be very monotonous. Instead, I'll point out to some of the important moments of the game. Well, here, for instance, uh, this is an important moment of the game. So both sides were playing the moves. White's idea is to somehow create some chances and try to win. And black was defending very doggedly here. He was playing normal moves, and suddenly black, in this position, which is of course drawn, he could have kept on waiting, but he went to force the matters by playing f5. He is attacking the knight and is aiming to go knight e4 check and pick up the f2 pawn. So this is a committal move. It's a risky move because suddenly black may lose one of the pawns if he advances too much, and that would leave white with a winning position. White first went king f3 attacking the rook. The rook went back, and then white decided to exchange the rooks. We have a typical knight endgame with an extra pawn for white. Now black has to take care that at least he preserves this knight so that it can sacrifice itself for the last pawn. If the knights are exchanged, then one pawn up in multiple pawn king pawn endgames are usually won for the player. So black has to keep that in mind. He has to preserve the knights. And after knight e5, black had to advance the pawns because this pawn cannot be defended. So here it looked slightly scary that white should not be able to win one of the pawns. But thankfully, black managed to defend this on time. White played a very nice move. He probed by playing h4. This is a mistake because the king will come up. This is a weak pawn, and white also has a passed pawn. And indeed, the king will come up and somehow try to round up this pawn with his knight. So black had to take this. And in this position, well, black can still play king e7 and defend the pawn, but he has to take care that he should not walk into some position where the king and the pawn creates a zugzwang situation where neither the king nor the knight can move because they have to defend the pawn. So this is the only danger which black has to avoid. Of course, black is a contender to world championship, so he is a very strong player. He knows what to do. In this position, black could have played king e6, but he simply opted to sacrifice his h pawn and reach a pure drawn position. Finally, we had a position which is uh, this position where white did have an extra pawn, but well, he could not do anything. Now, it's another very important position. If black plays this move carelessly, white would play king to h3, and this is the position which I mentioned previously. Here, black doesn't have any knight move because this pawn would be lost with a check, and white would have two extra pawns, which is winning. And the king cannot move because white would play king g4, winning the f4 pawn. Therefore, this is a type of position which black has to avoid. He played king h6. He is happy to wait, and he will play only king h5 when it is white to move. Since white cannot move his king, he has to move his knight, after which black could move his knight happily. So this is a small care which black had to take. Here black played king h6, white went knight c1. Now black king came up, white king came up, and black moved his knight to d4. After which black wins one of the pawn. So white played knight d3, black took this, white played check, and this is a dead draw. The knight would simply capture the pawn, leaving white with only one knight. So what can I say about the game? Well, it was a long game, 82 moves, and it shows that the players are willing to fight every inch for a victory. They are not happy with short draws. I think Ding would be happier with this game because he defended quite well. White had a scary attack, and probably Ding's idea was to hold white with black. He succeeded. He trails the match with 1 point, and now it is very important for us to see what happens in the next game. So tomorrow is a rest day. I shall be back day after tomorrow with analysis of round 11 of the World Chess Championship match. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.